Anger is boiling over in Minnesota following the death of George Floyd, an African-American man in police custody. Floyd died on Monday. A video showed a police officer kneeling on his neck as he tells the officer he can't breathe. Lindsay Rempel has more.
A Minneapolis police precinct on fire and a furious crowd calling for justice. Cheering protesters torched the station on the third night of violent demonstrations following the death of George Floyd. Other buildings were set on fire, shops were looted, and standoffs with riot police ensued. George Floyd is just the latest name on a long list of African Americans to die in police custody in the United States. Another catalyst to highlight the racial divide. The officers captured on video arresting George Floyd have been fired, but not arrested.
We demand a conviction. You know what I'm saying? That's how we rockin', man. And it's gonna be beautiful. All these people came together. We came together and we stood up for something. It's beautiful. It's a glorious day.
All four officers need to go to jail. These need to burn down. Then I feel like justice is served. Now we have come together, and now we're letting them know that this is enough. So hopefully things do get better, honestly. But at the end of the day, cops got to know that, bro, we're just as human as you. Stop treating us like we're just some dogs, honestly, and everyone will be happy.
But the violence at the protest has sparked backlash. The governor of Minnesota has mobilized the state's National Guard, and 500 troops have been deployed in Minneapolis to stop the rioting.
Help us use humane way to get the streets to a place where we can restore the justice so that those that are expressing rage and anger and demanding justice are heard, not those who throw firebombs into businesses.
Meanwhile, in Louisville, Kentucky, another protest movement is gaining momentum over the killing of yet another African American. Breonna Taylor was shot after police broke down the door of her home in March. The 911 call made by her boyfriend on the night of her death was released this Thursday.
911, Operator Harris, where is your emergency?
I don't know what is happening. Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend.
Prompting hundreds of people to march on City Hall demanding justice. And across the United States, people have been out in the streets in solidarity with both Louisville and Minneapolis. Lindsay Rempel, Euronews.
Well, for more on this, we can go to Minneapolis right now, where we can speak to Robert Klemko. He's a staff writer with The Washington Post. Thanks for joining us here. Well, we've seen some of the images coming into us. What's it like on the ground right now where you are?
Well, it's interesting. The police have changed many of their tactics here in the last 24 hours. For the first time, they've created a large perimeter around the area that was in flames last night and, has been the source of rioting at nighttime. Much of that has been to extinguish some of the fires that have been started, including the one at the police precinct, which is completely uninhabitable at this point. There were last night Postal Service vans stolen and crashed into barricades in front of the building and lit on fire in the middle of the street. So a lot of that cleanup effort is taking place now. It's thrown some of the peaceful protest plans for a loop because there is no common gathering place anymore. And people are now gathering, as you can see around me, in front of the line of police officers that is guarding the perimeter.
Indeed. Well, it's good that you mentioned those peaceful protests there, because seeing this, of course, through the media, it magnifies perhaps the worst. How much, we know that people are protesting from Memphis to Minnesota. How many are engaged in peaceful protests?
There's a real dichotomy between the day and the night. During the day, it's largely peaceful. It's a lot of older people, people really from all ages, all cultures. And then at night, you see a younger element take over. Again, it's multicultural, but you have people throwing things at police when they do confront protesters and starting fires. And as I'm sure you've seen from the footage coming out of Minneapolis, looting businesses to the extent that now residents who live near those businesses or above those businesses have begun standing guard outside with pistols. A lot of the businesses that surround this area are now evacuating some of the valuables that are inside, anticipating that the violence will spread, especially now that there's a perimeter around the area where people were once congregating.
But it does seem that these types of events happen with alarming recurrence in the United States. Is there anything that authorities can do? Is this just a question of police procedures that need to be changed?
They could stop extrajudicial killings of African Americans in the streets. I think that would probably stop the riots.
Let's see. Okay, well, there have been a number of other incidents, recently in the United States. I'm thinking of Ahmaud Arbery, of course, who was allegedly killed in that incident while he was out jogging. We've seen only this week evidence which exposes the racial divides in the United States. That incident where the woman was calling afraid in the Central Park in New York. Do you think that that's playing into the anger here as well?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things, and that's why you're seeing this protest not only localized here in Minneapolis, but happening all over the country. I think the same thing happened in 2014, which was sparked by the killing of Michael Brown in St. Louis, Ferguson, Missouri, more specifically. I think there is higher tensions here at the moment as a result of not only these local issues, but national politics. I mean, it's an election year. And the president has run on a campaign that is largely us versus them, describing protesters in Charlottesville who are white supremacists as very good people on both sides. I think that sort of rhetoric has inflamed a lot of the division here and inspired a lot of these people to come out who feel like, these police killings are the last straw.
Robert Klemko, staff writer with The Washington Post, thanks for joining us here on the programme. Well, as police tried to restore order during that protest in Minnesota, a CNN television crew was arrested live on air. Alex in the Cube has more details on that.
It's a truly extraordinary scene, televised for the whole world to see. Well, this is the tweet from Omar Jimenez afterwards. Here we are. Here he is in front of the camera saying, "And we're back." Now, what preceded the crew getting back up and on air was something truly extraordinary. Have a watch of this.
You can move back to where you'd like here. We are live on the air at the moment. This is the four of us. We are one team.
You're under arrest.
Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
Officer is with CNN and he's on the air right now.
Okay.
You are arresting him live on CNN. We told you before that we are with CNN.
So what you saw there, CNN broadcasting the arrest of one of their own correspondents. The state police there saying that the individuals were questioned about who they were and released when they found out they were the media. However, CNN said that they quite clearly identified as the media. This is a tweet they put out before the release, calling this a breach of the First Amendment. But also they went one step further, saying one of their white reporters was not detained, despite being just a few blocks away, and had a very different experience. That's one element of the tensions that this arrest brought up. The other one, of course, is the angle that the journalists were looking at. That is that journalists trying to report on police conduct were arrested in the course of doing that job. The Committee for Protection of Journalists said it rang of intimidation. Now, all of this led the governor of the state during his press conference to directly respond to this arrest. Of course, the individuals from CNN were released after he got involved, but this was his take after the events.
The issue here is trust. The community that's down there that's terrorized by this, if they see a reporter being arrested, their assumption is because something's going to happen that they don't want to be seen. And so that is unacceptable. I take full responsibility. There is absolutely no reason something like this should happen. Calls were made immediately. This is a very public apology to that team. It should not happen.
A very public apology for a very public arrest, I think it's fair to say, Togue. So yes, Omar Jimenez is back, but not before he became the story, when he really was trying to be there reporting on this unrest, which, as we're seeing, continues. An incredibly tense scene there, made worse by incidents like this.
A remarkable event there, Alex, thank you. Well, for more on this, let's talk to Ray Suarez, our reporter in Washington, D.C. Ray, good to see you there. On a political level, of course, we're expecting President Trump to say something, but he's been a bit silent, we could say, on this issue.
Well, it is President Trump's instinct to politicize any event, any untoward circumstances. He has, over the past 48 hours, criticized, for instance, the mayor of Minneapolis, who is a Democrat, who is perceived as an opponent of the president. He's criticized the governor in Minnesota, who is also a Democrat. And he also took to Twitter to speculate on the fact that once the looting begins, the shooting begins. And this caused Twitter to, as it has in the last several days, add a terms of services warning to the president's tweet, sort of bringing up the two issues that have obsessed the American president this week, his treatment on social media and this incident in Minnesota. So Joe Biden, not wanting to be silent on a day like today, has deplored the violence but also deplored the police action. And he noted that the fact that a CNN crew was arrested but that the policemen involved in the incident have not been tells him a lot. He'll be talking to the press later today, as will the president.
But some of the issues that have been brought up, if only tonight in our discussions and what Alex was saying there, we heard from the governor giving that direct apology and saying sorry. But those issues regarding how the police handle themselves, those are the things which perhaps people are looking for the president to address, surely, no?
He has been silent on those issues, and it's really not a surprise if you've covered this president. He has coveted the endorsement and support of police officers and police commanders around the country. He likes to pose with large numbers of police and give the thumbs up sign when there is conflict between local populations and their police department. The president, and before that, the candidate, always landed squarely on the side of the police, even when the circumstances were, let's say, questionable, as with the video we saw of George Floyd laying on the ground with a policeman on his neck. The president so far hasn't had much to say about the circumstances surrounding Mr. Floyd's death, but in general has been a strong supporter of the police, and he receives their support in return.
Well, you mentioned we've heard from Joe Biden. Of course, President Trump's a likely rival in the presidential election. He's called for justice and also for calm. Is there any indication right now that those appeals are actually having any effect?
Not yet. This is catching fire from one big metropolitan area to the next. As you heard earlier from the Washington Post reporter, there have been incidents like this one in many metropolitan areas in the country, including in Minneapolis, where not long ago, Philando Castile was shot to death by a suburban policeman outside St. Paul. So in places with experiences of this kind, Denver, Albuquerque, Memphis, Los Angeles, New York, and later today, Washington, D.C., you've seen follow-on demonstrations gearing up and taking to the streets.
Ray Suarez there joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you.